I came back early from my trip, and when I got home, I overheard my stepson's wife say, "We'll start tomorrow morning. That should begin showing symptoms in about a week." The next morning, I gave them the performance of a lifetime. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. What they didn't know was that this old actress still remembered all her lines, and I was about to win an Oscar. Let me back up for a minute, because context matters when you're talking about family betrayal. When I married Richard 30 years ago, we both brought children to the party. I had 7-year-old David. He had 3-year-old Jason, whose mother had abandoned them for a life of European adventures and pharmaceutical experiments. Together, we built Morrison Construction from nothing while raising 2 boys as our own. Richard died 10 years ago, leaving me the sole owner of a company now worth $50 million. Next week, I was planning to sell it and split the proceeds 3 ways: David, Jason, and me, each getting our fair share. Apparently, Jason had other ideas about what constituted fair. The flight from Toronto should have landed Sunday evening, but it was absolutely freezing there, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. My older son David's wedding was beautiful. Watching him marry Sarah in that little chapel overlooking Lake Ontario reminded me that some people actually find their happily ever after, unlike some of us who spend decades raising other people's ungrateful offspring. But after 2 days of Canadian winter, I'd had enough of feeling like a human popsicle. I caught the Friday night red-eye instead, exhausted but happy to be heading back to civilized temperatures. The taxi dropped me off just past 11, and I noticed lights still on in my kitchen. Strange. Jason typically spent Friday nights at bars, burning through money faster than a teenager with their first credit card. I let myself in quietly, not wanting to wake them. Really? They were doing me such a generous favor by house-sitting. How thoughtful of my younger stepson to finally show interest in my property, though I was starting to suspect his interest wasn't purely architectural. The conversation from the kitchen made me freeze in the hallway. And let me tell you, 27 years of raising someone else's child, I thought I'd heard everything. I was wrong. "We'll start tomorrow morning," Megan was saying, casual as discussing the weather forecast. "That should begin showing symptoms in about a week or so." My blood turned to ice water. But also, and I'm not proud of this, part of me was almost impressed by the sheer audacity. Almost. And then what? Jason's voice, tight with the kind of nervousness that suggested this wasn't his first rodeo in the stupidity department. "She's forgetful already. It has to be documented. Otherwise, we can't get full guardianship." Guardianship. Well, that explained why Jason had suddenly developed an interest in my well-being. Nothing says loving family like systematic poisoning. What about David? When he finds out, David's in Canada now. By the time he figures out what's happening, it'll be too late. The company will be under our control, and we can sell it ourselves. All of it, not just 1/3. And there it was, 27 years of raising this boy, and his master plan was to drug me into submission so he could steal the entire company instead of accepting his fair share. I'd always known Jason wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but this was impressively dumb even for him. I crept closer, straining to hear more of their brilliant criminal mastermind discussion. What if she fights us? She won't. Trust me, by the end of the week, she'll be much more manageable. Manageable. Like I was a difficult pet they needed to tranquilize. But David gets 1/3 too. He'll know something's wrong when David will get nothing if there's nothing left to inherit. We sell the company, keep the money, and by the time anyone figures it out, we'll be long gone. Well, if they wanted a confused old woman, I'd give them the performance of their lives. After all, I'd been dealing with Jason's dramatics for nearly 3 decades. I knew exactly how to play to this particular audience. I opened the front door and closed it loudly. "Hello? Anyone home?" Rapid whispers from the kitchen. Then footsteps. "Showtime." "Helen!" Megan appeared, all smiles and fake concern. The woman could have won awards for that performance if there were Oscars for Most Convincing Future Felon. "We didn't expect you back until Sunday. Came back early. Too cold." I rolled my suitcase across the floor, noting how Jason hung back in the kitchen doorway like a guilty teenager caught with stolen cookies. "Hope you two didn't get into too much trouble without adult supervision." "Of course not," Megan laughed, that tinkling sound she made when she was lying, which was approximately 90% of the time. "We've just been taking care of everything." "How was the wedding?" "Beautiful. David looks happy." I looked directly at Jason, who was doing his best impression of a deer in headlights. Really, genuinely happy. It's amazing what happens when someone finds a person who actually loves them for who they are. Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Good. Let him squirm." "That's great, Mom. I'm glad David's doing well." "Mom, he only called me that when he wanted something. Usually it was just Helen, and on particularly bad days, that woman Dad married. Yes, well, he's always been the responsible one. I smiled pleasantly. Speaking of which, I'm absolutely exhausted. Think I'll head straight to bed. Wait, Megan called, appearing with a glass of what looked like perfectly innocent warm milk, with cinnamon sprinkled on top. How domestic, how thoughtful, how absolutely dripping with pharmaceutical enhancements. I was now certain. I made you some warm milk. Thought it might help you sleep after all that traveling. I took it with both hands, letting them see how steady my grip was. For now, how thoughtful of you, dear. And then I did something that probably saved my life. I lifted the glass to my lips but didn't drink. Just let a tiny bit touch my mouth, and immediately tasted something that definitely wasn't cinnamon. Something bitter and chemical that made my lips go slightly numb. Holy hell. Whatever they were using wasn't some gentle sleep aid. This was industrial strength stupidity juice. You know what? I said, lowering the glass. I think I'm too wired to sleep just yet. Maybe I'll save this for later. I set the glass on the hallway table and headed upstairs, feeling their disappointed stares boring into my back. 27 years of raising someone else's child, and this was my thanks. Well, if Jason and his little wife thought they could out-scheme a woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, they were about to get an education in exactly how wrong two people could be. Poor little lambs had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who'd been winning battles since before they were born. Saturday morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and feeling strangely groggy. I shuffled downstairs, desperate for my usual morning coffee to clear the fog in my brain. I went through my normal routine, grinding the beans, measuring the water, the familiar ritual that had started every day for the past 40 years. The coffee smelled amazing as always, rich and dark and promising. I took my first sip and immediately felt something was off. Not the taste, it tasted normal. But within minutes, the room started to feel slightly fuzzy around the edges. That wasn't normal post-travel fatigue. The coffee. They'd gotten to my coffee somehow. By the time Jason appeared in the kitchen, I was genuinely struggling to think clearly. This wasn't the mild effect from just touching drugs to my lips. This was full-on pharmaceutical fog rolling through my brain. Morning, sweetheart. Sleep well? I asked, noting he looked like he'd slept about as well as someone plotting to poison their stepmother probably should. Which is to say, not at all. Fine, thanks. How about you? You look a little tired. Tired, right. That's what you call someone who's been unknowingly drugged with their morning coffee. I feel strange, I admitted, because it was true. Dizzy, like my head's full of cotton. Maybe it's jet lag, he suggested, but I caught the satisfaction flickering across his face. I needed to stop drinking the coffee, but if I suddenly changed my 40-year routine, they'd know I was onto them. So I took another small sip, just enough to make it look normal, while my brain fought through the increasing fog. Megan appeared in her silk robe, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. The woman had many talents: lying, scheming, pharmaceutical mixology, but morning hair wasn't one of her problems. Good morning, Helen. You look refreshed. Refreshed. I looked like someone who'd been drugged, because I had been. Thank you, dear. Amazing what a good night's sleep can do. Though actually, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck driven by a very polite pharmacist. By mid-morning, I was supposed to be getting sluggish and confused according to their timeline. The problem was, I actually was getting sluggish and confused, which meant I needed to start my own performance while fighting off real pharmaceutical effects. You know, I said, standing up and deliberately swaying. Though honestly, some of that swaying was genuine. I feel a bit lightheaded. Jason was at my side immediately, like a vulture circling wounded prey. Careful, Mom. Here, let me help you to the living room. As he guided me to the couch, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly like what they needed me to look like. A woman who was slowly losing her grip on reality. The only problem was, this time it wasn't entirely an act. This is so embarrassing, I said, settling onto the cushions. I've never felt quite so scattered. It's perfectly normal, Megan assured me with all the warmth of a funeral director. Travel can be exhausting. Why don't you just rest here? We'll take care of everything. We'll take care of everything, including making sure I consumed enough drugs to sign away my life's work. But here's the thing about underestimating someone. It only works if the person you're underestimating lets it work. And even with pharmaceutical fog clouding my judgment, I was still sharp enough to know I was in a fight for my life. Sunday morning brought a delightful development. They were getting bolder. And by bolder, I mean stupider, which was really saying something given their starting point. I came downstairs moving carefully, partly because they expected me to be impaired, and partly because I actually was feeling the lingering effects of yesterday's coffee adventure. I'd managed to avoid drinking much of it, but even small amounts of whatever they were using packed a punch. Jason was waiting with what looked like a health smoothie, purple, thick, and smelling like berries with an undertone of industrial-grade brain fog. "Morning, Mom. I thought you might like something healthy today. You didn't eat much yesterday." "Because I was busy trying not to consume your poison buffet, genius." "That's very thoughtful, but I'm not really hungry. You need to keep your strength up. Just a few sips?" The way he was pushing it made alarm bells ring. This wasn't their usual subtle approach. This was desperation in a blender. "Maybe later. I think I need to sit down." I made it to the living room couch and let myself look appropriately wobbly. Jason followed, still carrying his pharmaceutical smoothie like a waiter at the world's worst restaurant. "Mom, I'm worried about you. You're getting worse." "I'm getting worse." According to whose metric? The metric of how successfully are we drugging our stepmother? Because by that measure, their coffee gambit had been more successful than they probably realized. "I think I should see a doctor," I said, because I was curious where this would lead. "Actually, we've already arranged that. Dr. Patel is coming by this afternoon to examine you." Dr. Patel? I knew that name. Richard had mentioned him years ago, a doctor who'd lost his license for falsifying medical records, then got it back on some technicality. If they were bringing in Dr. Patel, this was more serious than I'd thought. "I think I'd prefer to see Dr. Williams. He's been my doctor for 20 years. Dr. Williams is booked up for weeks. Dr. Patel specializes in geriatric issues." Geriatric issues, also known as how to declare old people incompetent for fun and profit. I spent the rest of the morning playing the role of a woman whose mind was slowly turning to mush, while fighting off the very real effects of whatever they'd put in my coffee. I called Megan by my neighbor's name 3 times. I asked Jason to help me remember how to work the TV remote. I put salt in my orange juice instead of sugar, and then looked confused about why it tasted wrong, all while maintaining enough mental clarity to take careful notes about everything they said and did. The best part? They were buying every second of it. Watching them exchange those little looks of satisfaction was like watching 2 people congratulate themselves for successfully tricking a toddler into eating vegetables. Adorable, really. Around noon, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw a thin man in a rumpled suit carrying what looked like a medical bag, but had all the gravitas of a briefcase full of forged documents. Dr. Patel, I presumed. Richard's old acquaintance who'd fallen from grace and was apparently now making house calls for creative medical evaluations. "Mom, the doctor's here," Jason announced. Like this was wonderful news instead of the next phase in Operation Fleece the Stepmother. What followed was the most amateur medical evaluation in the history of healthcare fraud. Dr. Patel asked me basic questions. What year it was, who was president, could I count backward from 100, while Jason and Megan hovered like stage parents at a particularly terrible audition. I answered everything correctly but slowly, with just enough hesitation to suggest confusion without seeming completely gone. It was a delicate balance. Too sharp, and they'd increase the dosage. Too far gone, and they might panic and escalate to more drastic measures. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to ask you to sign some papers. Just routine medical forms." He handed me a pen and a stack of documents. Even pretending to be confused, I could see these weren't medical forms. Words like conservatorship and power of attorney jumped out at me like neon signs. "I can't read these," I said, which was becoming less of a lie thanks to their chemistry experiments. "That's perfectly normal. Just sign at the bottom of each page. Just sign away your independence, old lady. Nothing to worry about." "I don't think I should sign anything right now," I said. "I can't think clearly." "Mom," Jason said, "Dr. Patel says these forms will help get you the care you need." The care I needed. Right. The kind of care that involved signing over my life's work to someone who thought drugging elderly people was a viable business strategy. "But I can't read them." "That's why we're here to help you," Megan added, with all the sincerity of a used car salesman. I looked around the room, at Jason and Megan hovering like vultures, at Dr. Patel sweating through his cheap suit, at the stack of papers that would make me a prisoner in my own life. And for the first time since this began, I let a little real fear show. Because honestly, even knowing it was mostly an act, even being aware of what they were trying to do, the situation was genuinely terrifying. "I'm scared," I said, and that part wasn't acting at all. "Don't worry," Jason said, patting my hand like I was a confused child. "We'll take care of everything. That's what I'm afraid of." Monday morning brought the first real test of my acting abilities. And let me tell you, After 3 days of pretending to be slowly losing my mind while actually fighting off real pharmaceutical effects, I was starting to understand why actors demand such ridiculous salaries. I came downstairs carrying a manila folder, looking appropriately befuddled. This was easy enough since I genuinely was tired from staying up half the night planning my next moves while pretending to sleep like a drugged invalid. I'd also made a crucial decision. No more coffee. Whatever they'd put in the grounds was too strong, and I needed my wits about me. I'd have to fake my morning routine somehow. Jason, sweetheart, I found these papers in my study, but I can't remember what they're for. I handed him the folder, watching his face as he opened it. Inside were the original incorporation documents for Morrison Construction, the company Richard and I had built from nothing 40 years ago. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning, which would have been touching if he weren't planning to steal it. These are just old business papers. Mom, nothing important. Nothing important. Right. Just the legal foundation of a $50 million company. But who's keeping track? Are you sure? I thought they might be something I need to sign. No, you don't need to worry about business stuff anymore. And there it was. The assumption that I was too far gone to understand my own company. The company I'd been running successfully for 10 years since Richard's death. But sure, Jason, please enlighten me about how construction businesses work. But isn't the company mine now? Since Richard died? The look that passed between Jason and Megan was priceless. Like two people realizing they'd been caught stealing cookies by someone they thought was blind. Technically, yes. But Mom, you're not really in any condition to run a construction company. Technically. As if there were some other interpretation where I didn't actually own the business I'd been operating for a decade. I'm not? No. It's very complicated. Lots of regulations, financial decisions, employee management. Complicated. This from someone whose most complex business decision was usually beer or wine with dinner. So what should I do with it? Well, Megan said, jumping in with the subtlety of a freight train, there are people who specialize in managing companies for families who can't do it themselves. Like who? Like us, Jason said, apparently having forgotten that his business experience consisted of spending other people's money and complaining about having to work for it. I blinked at him in apparent confusion. But don't you need experience for that? Training? The silence that followed was beautiful. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to come up with a convincing answer. I've been watching and learning for years, Mom, and Megan has a business degree. Megan had a business degree like I had wings and a unicorn horn, but I nodded thoughtfully, as if this made perfect sense. That sounds very generous, but what about David? Doesn't he have a say in family business decisions? David lives in Canada now, Jason said, with the firmness of someone trying to close a door on an uncomfortable topic. He has his own career. He's not interested in construction. That was actually true. David was a successful architect and had never shown interest in the family business. But something told me he'd be very interested in preventing his younger brother from stealing it. I suppose that makes sense? I looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. Though I'm still confused about something. What's that? If I'm not competent to run my own company, how can I be competent to sign papers giving it to you? The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the refrigerator humming. Jason looked like someone had just asked him to explain quantum physics using interpretive dance. Megan's smile became so strained, I was worried her face might crack. Well, she said finally, that's what lawyers are for, to make sure everything is done properly. Lawyers, right. The same lawyers who would presumably be willing to notarize documents signed by someone who couldn't remember her own address. Lawyers? Are we getting lawyers involved? Just to make sure everything is legal and above board, Jason assured me, with all the sincerity of a politician promising lower taxes. That afternoon, while they thought I was napping, and really, how much napping did they think one person could do, I made the first of several phone calls that would change everything. Charles, it's Helen Morrison. I need to see you urgently. Of course, Helen. What can I do for you? I need you to document that I am mentally competent and aware of my decisions. And Charles, if anything happens to me in the next few weeks, I want you to know that it wasn't an accident. There was a pause. Helen, what's going on? I'll explain when I see you, but Charles, if someone tries to tell you I'm incompetent or confused, don't believe them. And whatever you do, don't let anyone else make decisions for me without my explicit recorded consent. The second call was harder. David, it's Mom. Mom? Hi, how are you feeling? You sounded a little off when we talked yesterday. Yesterday's call. I barely remembered it through the pharmaceutical fog. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Okay, you're scaring me. Jason and Megan are trying to drug me. They want to have me declared incompetent so they can steal the company. Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. Mom, that sounds... Are you sure you're feeling all right? David, I know how this sounds, but they've been putting something in my coffee. I heard them planning it Friday night. Maybe you misheard something. Jason wouldn't... David, please, I'm not confused. I'm not paranoid. I'm telling you that your brother is systematically poisoning me, and I need help. Another pause. Mom, when did you last see a doctor? He didn't believe me. My own son thought I was losing my mind. Never mind, I said quickly. I'm probably just tired. Forget I called. Mom, wait, but I hung up. If David wouldn't help me, I'd have to save myself. After I hung up, I sat in my study, looking out at the garden Richard and I had planted together 20 years ago. He'd always worried about Jason. Mark my words, Helen, he'd told me more than once. That boy has no backbone and too much entitlement. It's a dangerous combination. I'd always defended Jason, made excuses for his failures, hoped love and patience would turn him into a decent human being. Turns out Richard was right, again. But unlike Richard, I wasn't going to let Jason get away with it. Tuesday brought an escalation I should have seen coming, but somehow still managed to surprise me. I woke up feeling different, not confused or drugged, since I'd managed to avoid the coffee yesterday. But something was definitely off. It took me a few minutes to figure out what it was. They'd been getting more aggressive with their other attempts. The smoothie Jason kept pushing, the tea Megan offered, even the water glass she'd set by my bed. I was willing to bet they'd all been enhanced with their special ingredients. Smart move, idiots. Because nothing says subtle criminal enterprise like escalating your poisoning schedule when your victim starts asking inconvenient questions. I came downstairs to find Jason waiting with what looked like a vitamin smoothie, thick, purple, and smelling like berries, with an undertone of industrial strength cognitive impairment. Morning, Mom. I thought you might like something healthy today. Healthy, right. If your definition of healthy included enough sedatives to tranquilize a small horse. That's very thoughtful, but I'm not really hungry. You need to keep your strength up. Just a few sips? The desperation in his voice was almost comical, like watching someone trying to convince a diet-conscious friend to eat cake by insisting it was actually salad. Maybe later. I think I need to sit down. I made it to the living room and let myself look appropriately unsteady. Since I'd been avoiding their pharmaceutical breakfast buffet, the performance was easier to control now. Mom, I'm worried about you. You're getting worse. Getting worse. According to whose timeline? The timeline where I was supposed to be a drooling invalid by now, ready to sign over my life's work without reading the fine print. I think I should see a doctor. Actually, Dr. Patel called. He wants to come back today to finish your evaluation. Finish my evaluation. Also known as get those signatures while she's still coherent enough to hold a pen. I don't know if I'm up for more doctor visits. It's important, Mom, for your health, for my health. Right. Because nothing promotes wellness like having your legal rights systematically stripped away by people who think elderly abuse is a viable retirement plan. 2 hours later, Dr. Patel arrived with his briefcase of forged documents and his nervous energy cranked up to 11. This time, there was no pretense of medical evaluation. This was strictly business. Mrs. Morrison, based on my assessment, I'm recommending immediate intervention. You're showing signs of severe cognitive decline. I don't understand. It means you need someone to take care of you. These papers will ensure you get the help you need. He spread out a stack of documents on the coffee table like a casino dealer arranging cards for the world's most depressing poker game. Even through my pretended confusion, I could see what they were: power of attorney, conservatorship petition, and something that looked suspiciously like a commitment order. A commitment order. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they were planning to have me locked up. I can't read these, I said, which was only slightly a lie now that my head was clearer. That's exactly why you need to sign them, Jason said, so people who can read them can take care of you. The logic was breathtaking in its circular stupidity. I'm too confused to read legal documents, therefore I should sign legal documents that give other people control over my life. It was like arguing that someone was too drunk to drive, so they should definitely sign over their car keys. What happens after I sign these? You'll be transferred to a facility where you can get proper care, Dr. Patel said. A facility? How delightfully vague. I was picturing something with locked doors and windows that didn't open. What kind of facility? A place that specializes in people with your condition. Very nice. Very comfortable. How long would I stay there? That depends on your progress. Possibly permanently. Permanently? Well, at least they were being honest about their long-term plans. I looked around the room, at Jason trying to look concerned while practically salivating over my signature, at Megan hovering like a well-dressed vulture, at Dr. Patel sweating through his discount suit while preparing to rubber stamp my mental incompetence. And I made a decision that probably saved my life. "Okay," I said, "I'll sign them." But just as Dr. Patel was reaching for his pen, my phone rang. "That's probably David calling back," I said, and for the first time since this began, I saw real panic flash across their faces. The relief on their faces was absolutely spectacular when I ignored the ringing phone, like watching 3 people realize they'd just won the lottery, except their prize was my entire life, and I was the one holding the winning ticket. What they didn't know was that I'd been expecting that call. "This is for the best, Mom," Jason said, as Dr. Patel prepared the papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, frequently. "Safer from what? From people who might try to take advantage of you, from making decisions that could hurt you financially." The irony was so thick you could serve it for dinner. Like what decisions? Well, like deciding to give away the company to charity, or changing your will without understanding the consequences. Interesting. So they knew about my charitable inclinations, though I'd never actually mentioned giving the company to charity, which meant they'd been monitoring my communications more carefully than I'd realized. "But I haven't decided to give anything to charity. You mentioned it last month. Said you were thinking about leaving everything to some foundation for underprivileged children." I had no memory of saying any such thing, which meant either my memory was worse than I thought, or they were putting words in my mouth to justify their actions. I was betting on option 2. Why would that be a problem? "Because it would leave family with nothing," Megan said, with all the righteous indignation of someone who'd never contributed a day's work to building what she was trying to steal. "But it's my company now, isn't it?" "Technically, yes, but morally, it belongs to family." Morally. This from someone who was systematically poisoning elderly relatives for inheritance money. The moral authority was overwhelming. Dr. Patel cleared his throat like a theater director trying to get his actors back on script. "Perhaps we should focus on the documents." He handed me a pen and pointed to the first signature line. "Just sign here, Mrs. Morrison." I took the pen with hands that trembled slightly, partly performance, partly genuine nervousness, and paused. "What happens after I sign these?" "You'll be safe," Jason said. "Protected, cared for, protected, like a butterfly in a jar, beautiful, contained, and slowly suffocating." I was about to sign the first document, not because I planned to honor it, but because I needed them to think they'd won, when the front door burst open. "Don't sign anything!" David stood in the doorway, looking like he'd traveled through several time zones and multiple states of panic to get here. Behind him were 2 uniformed police officers. "David!" I said, letting genuine surprise and relief flood my voice. "What are you doing here?" "I got your message," he said, breathing hard. "The one you left on my voicemail last night." "What message?" I hadn't left any message. Then I remembered. When they thought I was napping yesterday, I'd called David back but got his voicemail. In my pharmaceutical fog, I'd rambled about Jason and Megan and danger, and apparently I'd made more sense than I'd thought. "I caught the red eye," David continued, looking around the room and taking in the scene with sharp focus. "Called the police from the airport when I heard what you said about being drugged." The next few seconds were pure theater. Dr. Patel suddenly remembered he had another appointment. Funny how that works. Jason started babbling about misunderstandings and family disagreements with the coherence of someone speaking in tongues. Megan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a suitcase, apparently planning to make a run for it like this was some kind of heist movie. And me? I sat on the couch, still holding that pen, and watched 27 years of resentment and entitlement finally catch up with my stepson. "Ma'am, are you Helen Morrison?" the first officer asked. "Yes. Your son called us from Toronto, said you were being held against your will and possibly drugged. Is that accurate?" I looked around the room, at David's worried face, at Jason's panicked expression, at Megan clutching her suitcase like a security blanket, at Dr. Patel, who was sweating through his suit like he was in a sauna. Showtime. "Officer, for the past week these people have been drugging my food and drinks to make me appear mentally incompetent so they could steal my company." "That's not true," Jason protested with the conviction of someone who'd just been caught red-handed. "She's confused. She's been having episodes." "What kind of episodes?" the officer asked, pulling out his notepad like this was the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. "Memory loss, disorientation, difficulty with basic tasks." "And when did these episodes start?" "About a week ago, right around the time I came home early and overheard their master plan." "What a coincidence." The officer made notes. Mrs. Morrison, do you have any evidence of these alleged drugging incidents? I reached into my bathrobe pocket and pulled out the small digital recorder I'd been carrying for 3 days. I've been recording conversations since Sunday. Would you like to hear them? The look on their faces was worth every moment of the past week's performance. Game, set, and match. What followed was the most entertaining hour I'd had in years. As the police listened to my recordings, Jason and Megan's story fell apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. We heard Jason discussing getting control before David finds out. We heard Megan talking about making me more cooperative and timeline pressures. We heard Dr. Patel coaching them on what symptoms to document and how to make the evaluation look legitimate. We heard Jason saying, if she won't sign willingly, we'll have to find another way. But the recording that really sealed their fate was from Tuesday morning, when they didn't know I was listening from the top of the stairs. She's getting suspicious, Megan's voice came through crystal clear. What if she refuses to sign? Then we go to plan B, Jason replied. Which is? Accidents happen to confused elderly people all the time, especially ones who wander around at night, maybe take too many pills, maybe fall downstairs. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the police officers looked shocked. By the time the recordings ended, Jason and Megan were in handcuffs, Dr. Patel was being questioned about his medical license, and I was being escorted to a real hospital for blood tests. Because apparently, even though I'd been successfully avoiding most of their pharmaceutical buffet, the coffee incident had left enough traces in my system to show up on tests. Mrs. Morrison, the emergency room doctor said, looking at my lab results with the expression of someone who just found something disturbing under a microscope. You have detectable levels of benzodiazepines in your bloodstream. Not high enough to be immediately dangerous, but significant enough to cause the symptoms you described. How long will it take to clear my system? A few days with proper hydration and rest. But Mrs. Morrison, the psychological impact of this kind of betrayal can take much longer to heal. I thought about that as David sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand like I might disappear if he let go. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have believed you immediately when you called. You came when I needed you. That's what matters. But if I hadn't listened to that voicemail, if I hadn't caught that flight, but you did, and now it's over. Except it wasn't quite over yet. There was still the matter of justice to consider. David, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to make sure they pay for this. Not just legally, but completely. I want everyone to know what they tried to do. Mom, are you sure? The trial will be public. People will know that I survived an attempt to steal my life and my livelihood, and that I was smart enough to catch the people who tried to do it. I squeezed his hand. I'm not the victim in this story, David. I'm the woman who outsmarted 2 criminals who thought they could drug an elderly person into submission. What about the company? The company is yours now. All of it. Assuming you want it. What? Jason was right about one thing. I was planning to split it 3 ways. But after this week, I've realized something important. Some things should stay in the family. The right family. David was quiet for a long moment. I don't know anything about running a construction company. You'll learn. You're smart, honest, and you have something Jason never had. What's that? Integrity. Also, you've never tried to poison me for money, which really sets you apart in terms of qualifications. We both laughed, and for the first time in a week, it felt like the world was back on its proper axis. But I wasn't done with Jason and Megan yet. Not by a long shot. What followed was the most entertaining hour I'd had in years. As the police listened to my recordings, Jason and Megan's story fell apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. We heard Jason discussing getting control before David finds out. We heard Megan talking about making me more cooperative and timeline pressures. We heard Dr. Patel coaching them on what symptoms to document and how to make the evaluation look legitimate. We heard Jason saying, if she won't sign willingly, we'll have to find another way. But the recording that really sealed their fate was from Tuesday morning, when they didn't know I was listening from the top of the stairs. She's getting suspicious, Megan's voice came through crystal clear. What if she refuses to sign? Then we go to plan B, Jason replied. Which is? Accidents happen to confused elderly people all the time, especially ones who wander around at night, maybe take too many pills, maybe fall downstairs. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the police officers looked shocked. By the time the recordings ended, Jason and Megan were in handcuffs. Dr. Patel was being questioned about his medical license, and I was being escorted to a real hospital for blood tests. because apparently, even though I'd been successfully avoiding most of their pharmaceutical buffet, the coffee incident had left enough traces in my system to show up on tests. Mrs. Morrison, the emergency room doctor said, looking at my lab results with the expression of someone who'd just found something disturbing under a microscope. You have detectable levels of benzodiazepines in your bloodstream. Not high enough to be immediately dangerous, but significant enough to cause the symptoms you described. How long will it take to clear my system? A few days with proper hydration and rest. But Mrs. Morrison, the psychological impact of this kind of betrayal can take much longer to heal. I thought about that as David sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand like I might disappear if he let go. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have believed you immediately when you called. You came when I needed you. That's what matters. But if I hadn't listened to that voicemail, if I hadn't caught that flight, but you did, and now it's over. Except it wasn't quite over yet. There was still the matter of justice to consider. David, I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to make sure they pay for this. Not just legally, but completely. I want everyone to know what they tried to do. Mom, are you sure? The trial will be public. People will know that I survived an attempt to steal my life and my livelihood, and that I was smart enough to catch the people who tried to do it. I squeezed his hand. I'm not the victim in this story, David. I'm the woman who outsmarted two criminals who thought they could drug an elderly person into submission. What about the company? The company is yours now. All of it. Assuming you want it. What? Jason was right about one thing. I was planning to split it 3 ways. But after this week, I've realized something important. Some things should stay in the family. The right family. David was quiet for a long moment. I don't know anything about running a construction company. You'll learn. You're smart, honest, and you have something Jason never had. What's that? Integrity. Also, you've never tried to poison me for money, which really sets you apart in terms of qualifications. We both laughed, and for the first time in a week, it felt like the world was back on its proper axis. But I wasn't done with Jason and Megan yet, not by a long shot. 3 months later, I stood in a courtroom wearing my best suit and my most satisfied expression, watching Jason get sentenced to 15 years for elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. Megan got 12 years. Dr. Patel, who turned out to be exactly what Richard had said, a doctor who'd lost his way and found it again in all the wrong places, lost his license permanently and got 5 years. Do you have anything to say to the court? The judge asked me. I stood up slowly, not because I was frail. The drugs had cleared my system weeks ago, but because I wanted to savor every second of this moment. Your Honor, I raised Jason Morrison for 27 years. I fed him, clothed him, educated him, and loved him like my own son. I provided him with every opportunity to become a decent human being. I looked directly at Jason, who was staring at his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Instead, he repaid that love by attempting to systematically poison me into legal incompetence so he could steal everything I'd worked for. When caught, he showed no remorse, only anger that his plan had failed. I paused, letting that sink in for the packed courtroom. Because yes, this had become something of a local sensation. Apparently, elderly woman outsmarts stepson's drugging scheme was the kind of story that really captured people's imagination. I want the court to know that I feel no pity for him. I feel no family loyalty towards someone who was willing to destroy my mind and my freedom for money, and I hope his sentence serves as a warning to anyone else who thinks elderly people are easy targets. The judge nodded approvingly. Thank you. Mrs. Morrison, your courage in documenting this abuse has ensured that these defendants can never victimize anyone else. Courage. I preferred to think of it as being too stubborn to die quietly, but courage worked too. After the sentencing, David and I went to lunch at my favorite restaurant, the same place where Richard and I used to celebrate business victories back when we were building the company from nothing. How does it feel? David asked. Like justice, I said simply. Though I have to admit, there's something deeply satisfying about watching people who thought they were so clever discover that they weren't nearly as smart as they believed. What happens now? Now I live. I help you transition into running the company. I travel somewhere warm, and I never, ever take family loyalty for granted again. And Jason? I thought about my stepson, who would spend the next 15 years learning what it felt like to have no control over his daily life, his food, his schedule, or his future. The irony was almost too perfect. Jason gets to experience exactly what he tried to do to me. The only difference is, he actually deserves it. That evening, I sat in my living room, my real living room, finally free of people who wanted to hurt me, and called Sarah, David's wife. "Helen, how are you doing?" "I'm perfect, dear, but I wanted to thank you again for encouraging David to listen to that voicemail." "Of course. Family protects family." "Yes," I agreed. "Real family does." Outside my window, the evening was settling into night, peaceful and quiet. Inside my house, I was finally completely safe. Jason had tried to steal my mind, my freedom, and my fortune. Instead, he'd given me something invaluable, the knowledge that I was strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to save myself. And honestly, that was worth more than any inheritance he'd ever dreamed of. The trial lasted 2 weeks and was everything I'd hoped for. I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through the entire ordeal from my unexpected return home to the moment of arrest. The recordings were played in court, and I watched Jason flinch when his own voice filled the room. All of it, not just 1/3. "Mrs. Morrison," the prosecutor asked, "were you afraid for your life?" "Absolutely. My stepson was planning to drug me into incompetence and steal everything I'd worked for. If my son hadn't arrived when he did, I'd be dead or locked in a facility somewhere." Jason's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Jason was just concerned about my mental state. Concerned? I looked directly at Jason. By systematically poisoning me? The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete and utter satisfaction. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked how I felt about the verdict. "I feel vindicated," I said simply. "And I feel like justice has been served to people who thought elderly people were easy targets." "Any message for your stepson?" I thought about it for a moment. Actions have consequences. Today, Jason learned what those consequences look like. That evening, David and I celebrated with dinner at the city's finest restaurant. His family had flown in from Toronto for the trial, and my grandchildren were staying with friends while we dealt with the legal aftermath. "What now?" Sarah asked. "What's next for you?" "Now I live," I said, raising my wine glass. "I travel somewhere warm. I spoil my grandchildren when they visit, and I enjoy every single day that Jason and Megan didn't manage to steal from me." "Any regrets?" David asked. "Just one. I regret that I spent 27 years trying to love someone who was planning to kill me for money. But that's in the past now," I smiled. "The future starts tomorrow." 3 months later, I stood in a courtroom wearing my best suit and my most satisfied expression, watching Jason get sentenced to 15 years for elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. Megan got 12 years. Dr. Patel, who turned out to be a real doctor who'd been supplementing his income with creative medical evaluations, lost his license and got 5 years. "Do you have anything to say to the court?" the judge asked me. I stood up slowly, not because I was frail, the drugs had cleared my system weeks ago, but because I wanted to savor every second of this moment. "Your Honor, I raised Jason Morrison for 27 years. I fed him, clothed him, educated him, and loved him like my own son. I provided him with every opportunity to become a decent human being." I looked directly at Jason, who was staring at his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Instead, he repaid that love by attempting to systematically poison me into legal incompetence so he could steal everything I'd worked for. When caught, he showed no remorse, only anger that his plan had failed. I paused, letting that sink in for the packed courtroom. Because yes, this had become something of a local sensation. Apparently, elderly woman outsmarts stepson's drugging scheme was the kind of story that really captured people's imagination. I want the court to know that I feel no pity for him. I feel no family loyalty towards someone who was willing to destroy my mind and my freedom for money. And I hope his sentence serves as a warning to anyone else who thinks elderly people are easy targets. The judge nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison. Your courage in documenting this abuse has ensured that these defendants can never victimize anyone else." Courage. I preferred to think of it as being too stubborn to die quietly, but courage worked too. After the sentencing, David and I went to lunch at my favorite restaurant, the same place where Richard and I used to celebrate business victories back when we were building the company from nothing. "How does it feel?" David asked. "Like justice," I said simply, though I have to admit, there's something deeply satisfying about watching people who thought they were so clever discover that they weren't nearly as smart as they believed. "What happens now?" "Now I live. I help you run the company. I travel somewhere warm, and I never, ever take family loyalty for granted again." I raised my wine glass. And Jason gets to experience exactly what he tried to do to me, losing control of his entire life. The only difference is, he actually deserves it. That evening, I sat in my living room, my real living room, finally free of people who wanted to hurt me, and called Sarah, David's wife. "Helen, how are you doing?" "I'm perfect, dear. Absolutely perfect." "Good, because family protects family." "Yes," I agreed, looking around my house that was finally, completely mine again. Real family does. Outside my window, outside, the evening was settling into night, peaceful and quiet. Inside my house, I was finally, completely safe. Jason had tried to steal my mind, my freedom, and my fortune. Instead, he'd given me something invaluable, the knowledge that I was strong enough, smart enough, and stubborn enough to save myself. And honestly, that was worth more than any inheritance he'd ever dreamed of. Some people think getting older means getting weaker. They're wrong. Sometimes it just means getting smarter, tougher, and a lot less willing to put up with other people's nonsense. Jason Morrison learned that the hard way, and frankly, he deserved every minute of it. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.